Hello and welcome to episode 2 of USC Trojans on Fan Nation podcast. I'm Jacob Erlbaum, joined by my co-host Jacob Hare. And tonight we are very lucky to be joined by Mississippi State head coach Mike Leach. Coach, how are you doing? Great to have you on.
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing? Where are you guys, out of LA?
I'm out of LA and he's out of cold Syracuse.
Oh, well, that narrows it down. You guys can just meet in the middle somewhere in Des Moines, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, Coach, thanks for being here and coming off a really big win for the Bulldogs over Texas A&M. What was it like for your team to get that win last week? And talk to us about that.
Well, we were excited about it. I mean, A&M's a very good team. I mean, they're tall and they're fast and they do so many good things. And it was a very physical game. Pretty fun game to watch if you didn't have so much writing on it as far as coaching it, I guess. But no, I was really happy for our coaches, our players, and everybody involved. So it was a very good win for us.
So, Coach, I mean, you coach in the Pac12 and the SEC. What's the biggest difference between playing those two stadiums?
Less than you would think. Everybody always searches for these big differences between conferences, and there really aren't very many. I mean, you've got players that have worked, most of their lives or much of their lives to be good football players, and coaches, to develop as good coaches. And so it's incredibly competitive. The games at Iowa Wesleyan College when I was there were real competitive, but stadiums, I would say a little louder in the SEC just because there's more people in the stadiums overall on the average. And then the tailgating scene in the SEC, I think, is pretty unparalleled. And like as you drive up to a stadium and you'll ask what it's like, and I can't really tell you very much because, I got to retire or something like that in order to do much tailgating. But as you drive in, I mean, there'll just be everything from grass to parking lots to anywhere there's space where people have tents, and some of these places have or they'll have those buses, the motorhome buses, and some of these things have more technology than my house does. Everything from like pool tables to like barbecues with all kinds of technology, a number of TVs, like some customized bed or table or some deal. And then, and it really is impressive. And as you come into most of the stadiums, you see that starting to take shape from way out. And you kind of go through slow and you kind of check that out. And then you go into the stadium. And part of the reason I think the tailgating is so good is one is the weather, but then the other thing is the SEC. If you think about the conference, we're relatively close together with one another, and people can easily drive back and forth. Like say you play LSU or somebody, and this isn't uncommon at all. And you run into people like this, like, so for example, Mississippi State will have these friends that they met at LSU. Okay, when you guys come to Mississippi State, we want to hang out with you. We want to see you. And so then they'll hang out and maybe a couple other people will come, and then Mississippi State will go to LSU, and then everybody gathers back up together. So it's very social, and an awful lot of people know a lot of people because of the proximity, where driving from Pullman, say, to Los Angeles, or flying from Pullman to Los Angeles has a lot more logistics involved than, driving less than 5 hours somewhere,
So you brought up the conference realignment, and obviously that was a big topic of the offseason with USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, and last year Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC. What's your unfiltered opinion on that?
Well, I think the first thing, obviously, it's about money and power. And I'm not a guy because how does it hurt me? I mean, at Mississippi State, we can only play so many teams. And then they say, okay, now you have to play Oklahoma and Texas. It's like, okay, I see that. Okay, then who are we not playing? Does that mean that Alabama and Auburn are heading to the eastern side? And hypothetically, okay, I don't have to play Alabama and Auburn. And then now I have to play Texas and OU instead. I mean, how did I lose on that deal? And so the SEC's loaded up enough. It really doesn't matter, although it's kind of funny because there's teams in this conference that, you may not play for 8 years and, that type of thing. And then, one way or the other, they'll gather the conference or the divisions or whatever, and it'll be a hardy schedule, no question. If, just look at the SEC plus Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, the names alone are scary, but I think the other more interesting thing to watch is UCLA, which I guess UCLA is now on the fence. I mean, rather than solve a whole lot of other problems in California, their fine governor is going to solve college football, and hopefully that turns out better than it does in the state of California. But I guess we'll find out. And so UCLA might be on the fence, but all I could think about, and I've been coaching for a while, is USC on those 5 plane rides a year coming from 2 to 3 time zones away, returning back to Los Angeles, while their opponents only have to do it less than once every other year, because the other part, the main body of the Big Ten, is relatively close to one another.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned how the SEC, a lot of the schools are very close. And now with USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten soon, how is that going to affect student athletes and coaches, especially those for USC and UCLA having to travel to the East Coast, 5-hour plane flight every week or other week? What do you think that's going to be like?
I don't know. If you wanted a sample, I'd call up Hawaii and I'd get some feedback from them. I don't know. Obviously the Big Ten's a good physical conference. The other thing, I think it'll be kind of exciting and sort of NFL-like to watch them play in weather, because you will get some NFL weather playing on the road in the Big Ten in the winter. And then, and so that could be interesting. And then, of course, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have had kind of a tight relationship for a long time without actually being in each other's conferences. I do think it'll be interesting. I don't know. I wonder, though, if the newness of it will wear off and they'll change. The one thing I will say is I don't think that changes in college football are done. I think that a lot of times that things will change in college football and people think they're all well thought out, because anytime you attach the word university to something, everybody thinks everybody's brilliant, and that's not necessarily true. It's like all walks of life. There's some brilliant people and there's a lot of dumb ones, and then most of us wallow around somewhere in between and hope for the best and try to rely on common sense in key situations. But I think that, and so sometimes they could be knee-jerk reactions, and follow the money would be pretty good advice. But I'm kind of curious. I mean, will it hold up? Will it withstand? I mean, because if you think back in 2010, I believe it was, there was a time when Boise State, TCU, and I also think San Diego State might have been right on the threshold of doing it and didn't do it. But they joined the Big East. And somehow everybody's kind of forgotten this, but it is kind of relevant on this conversation. They joined the Big East. And then after about 6 months, they rethought that and unjoined the Big East.
Would you say you're happy with the state of college football right now? I mean, I know with the NIL deals and the transfer portal, there's a lot going on. And as a guy who sees it firsthand every day, what's your current state of mind on it?
I think it's combustible. I think with the portal, I think having a window, narrowing the window, I think was very good. It's kind of like the free agency window in professional sports. So I think that's good. And I think it creates clarity to the teams and to the players. And I think that's a good move. I think that, right now we haven't really defined whether these guys are student athletes or whether they're professionals. And at some point, I think you have to define that because there's responsibilities and benefits to each. And maybe there's room to do both. Like, for example, a professional, the benefit is you get more money and you can, hit the market and maybe end up with more money, et cetera. Okay, but the negative is one, you get drafted. I'm not saying the way college football currently does it, but every other professional league, name any of them. Every other professional league, professionals get drafted, they get cut, and they get traded. Okay, that's what professionals do. And occasionally you say, well, you can't do that to a kid just out of high school. Well, they do it to them in basketball, soccer, baseball, hockey. They do it every day because they are just what you said, or just what I said, I guess, a professional. Okay, that's what professionals are. And that's why some people remain amateurs for a period of time to prepare themselves mentally and physically to be a professional. Okay. And then others, and I think most others, would be better served to be, a more of a traditional student athlete. And a traditional student athlete, and this is how it stands now, the benefits now are one, you don't get traded. Two, you decide which school you go to. Three, you can't be cut because of playing ability. Like if you refuse to go to practice, refuse to go to class, you can be cut for that, but you can't be cut just because, you're not a very talented football player. Okay. And then I think, I think they ought to kind of elevate that, take care of those guys from the standpoint, something like if you're a traditional student athlete, you graduate and you finish your eligibility at a school, then you get some stipend at the end. I don't know the amount. They'd have to sort that out, like $100,000 to $150,000, something like that. And then, but if you go on the portal, you go to another school, well, you don't get the completion bonus then, And so I think there's space to do two things. And, but I think you have to define it. And I think that, there's a bunch of people that are better served to not get, and we got to avoid bidding wars. These other professional leagues have salary caps. We should have salary caps. It shouldn't just be, here's the two richest schools just dumping all the money they can in some crazy bidding war. And then all of a sudden the guy goes to the NFL and he takes a cut in pay, but I think that, I just think that we got to sort it out. I think there's a lot of committees sorting this out and trying to, and some are better than others. Some of these committees like 30 people on them. Well, 30 people can't decide anything,
Yeah, Coach, I want to move on now to the USC Trojans and their upcoming game against your former team, Washington State. Looking ahead to that game, USC off to a good start this season, unbeaten so far, but Washington State also just one loss. What can you tell us about Washington State and that football program so far this season?
I haven't watched them a lot. I've been busy watching our team. They seem to be playing really good on defense. They have a dynamic quarterback. Both teams have dynamic quarterbacks. And, of course, I know that whole staff at USC and a lot of the staff at Washington State. And then, so I think it should be kind of an exciting game. but they've been really doing some good things defensively at Washington State, and they're getting better on offense there. And so we'll see. It should be a good matchup. And the thing that I think will be interesting to see for the Trojans, their tougher games are coming up. Oregon State I think is really good, but has been playing really good, and then of course USC won up there, and then but some of the tougher guys they're playing are coming up, the likes of maybe Washington State, we'll see, but Utah and UCLA. I don't know if they play Oregon or not. I haven't quite figured out what Oregon is this year, but we'll see.
So, Coach, I know you're a very busy man, and you got a game to prepare for this weekend. But before we let you go, we just have one final question. You're a guy who's made the jump from one Power 5 conference to another, and Lincoln Riley, who was under you for a while, did the same thing. Did you talk to him or give him any advice during the process when he was making this leap?
We've talked some off and on. When he made the move, we didn't. And I'll tell you, that's a tough situation. I mean, because, you got to keep it pretty quiet for both schools. You keep it quiet for the school you're leaving and keep it quiet for the school you're going to, so everybody can kind of get their course set,
For sure. Well, Coach, we want to thank you so much. We know you're really busy, but we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and Jacob. And good luck the rest of the way, and we'll definitely be rooting for the Bulldogs.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and good talking to you. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Coach. Best of luck the rest of the way.
All right, you too.
Again, that was Mississippi State football head coach Mike Leach joining us on USC Trojans on Fan Nation podcast. And now back to USC football. We got a great episode coming your way. The Trojans, another win last week, this time over the Arizona State Sun Devils, getting the job done 42-17. The offense gets back on track after a shaky game on the road against Oregon State. My friend Jacob Hare, what can you tell us about that?
Well, before we talk about the defense, let's stick with offense because
I said offense.
All right. Well, I just want to make sure.
Misheard me. I said offense. Don't worry.
No, but I know we're going to get into some defensive debates later, but let's start with the offense, all right? Caleb Williams was nothing short of fantastic in the game. I mean, he showed he might be the best dual threat ability quarterback in the nation, and he might be the hardest quarterback to take down. The offensive line was shaky for the entire first half. They picked it up in the second half, but really in the first half, the plays that Caleb was making behind that shaky O-line was truly sensational to me. I mean, that one pick that he had in the end zone, whatever, we can scratch that off the record because he made up for it with 10 plays where he looked like Superman and there was no stopping him. He had no kryptonite in that game. But I was most impressed with the receiver room. Guys like Jordan Addison were showing off. Mario Williams really should have had 2 touchdowns. He got 1 called back, but we saw the speed that he has. He is one fast dude. And Brandon Rice, so all of those guys can make a big play at any point in the game. And for the Trojans going forward, they can't be one-dimensional where Williams only targets Addison. So it's nice to know that the receiver room is loaded. What did you see from the game?
I mean, I couldn't agree more about the receivers. You have 8 different receivers with multiple catches. That's what you love to see, the offense. Quarterback Caleb Williams being able to spread the ball around, getting everybody involved. And especially, you mentioned wide receiver Jordan Addison. Didn't have that big game against Oregon State 2 weeks ago, but this week gets back on track, a big game from him. And then the rest of the receivers, you mentioned Mario Williams, getting it done, spreading the ball out, Caleb Williams, making the offense more than just one receiver. It can't be just him and Addison. And like I said, everyone got involved, and that's what you love to see from your star quarterback.
I mean, there's so many things that I could pick apart from this game, but the one stat that really stands out to me through 5 games of the USC season is USC is 5th in the nation on third down, and they're number 1 in the entire Pac-12. Third down is called the money down, if you know, but Caleb Williams is just a clutch player. I mean, whenever you need him to make a play in the game, throughout the game, there were so many plays on third down and in the red zone where you just needed him to step up and be the true talent that he is, and he did. He provided that ability for the Trojans. I mean, the first half wasn't great, but that second half, they completely outbursted, and they really, really, really showed flashes of the best offense in college football. Call me crazy, but that's what I saw from them this game.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head talking about Williams being clutch, making plays, especially on third down. I think you saw in that first half when the offensive line struggled to protect Williams, He did it with his legs. His rushing ability was a huge key to USC's offensive success. Despite the sloppiness in the first half, he kept the offense from going off the rails, and I think that that really powered USC and kept them going when some drives could have died out on third down. You saw Williams revert to his legs and really helped the offense.
And I mean, in our pregame meeting for this podcast, you brought up a stat to me that I didn't even realize, and that's really stood out to me since you told me this. 8 receivers on the USC team have multiple catches this season. I mean, the ball is being distributed out like candy by Caleb, and it's just amazing to see because a year ago when Drake London went down for the Trojans, there was nothing. They couldn't get anything on offense. Like Gary Bryant was showing flashes of a wide receiver one throughout the time, but there was no quarterback. There was no Lincoln Riley. And then this season, you see what a difference a season makes. And we were just talking about it with Mike Leach, the transfer portal. And I said this on the last episode, but I believe that you can fix one side of the ball per offseason, and the Trojans really fix that offense. And going forward, you have Malachi Nelson coming in 2023. You have other receivers like Zion Branch coming in. And it's just – I feel like USC's wide receiver U at this point. You see in the NFL, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Michael Pittman Jr., Drake London. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, and I mean, Jordan Addison, he's a transfer, but he's still a part of the USC family, and USC definitely they're coming close to that title wide receiver U. I know Alabama's had some great receivers recently, though LSU, I think they still might have a bit of a leg up on the Trojans, but the Trojans are coming for that title. They're not far behind. Look at these receivers, and you mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown, former Trojan this season. I mean, exploding. He's a rising star in the league. So USC and the receivers they're producing, we'll see what Drake London does, but pretty good stuff coming from the Trojan program.
For sure. And I mean, let's talk about another skill position, running back, which has been a great spot for the Trojans all year with Travis Dye leading the way, and Raleek Brown's adding some, and Austin Jones, who I believe needs to get more involved, but when he shows off his speed, he's one of the fastest guys in the country. I just want to bring up a quote that I heard post-game from Travis Dye where he said, you come off a win like Oregon State, and it's almost like you feel like you're over the hump, and you're thinking, okay, we made it. That's absolutely never the case. You're never at the point where you've made it. We have to realize that, and we did that in the second half. I mean, just the locker room culture stemming from a quote like this is something that the Trojans haven't had since Pete Carroll. Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch, Josh Henson, all those guys have been there, done that. They know what to say in the locker room. This game plan that they've installed in the Trojans offense and defense has worked. It's taken Oklahoma to the college football playoffs multiple times with Lincoln and Grinch. And, I mean, just hearing that from Travis Dye, I know he's an experienced transfer senior from Oregon, and he has that leadership. He's been there. He's done that. He's played some big games as a collegiate player. But I love hearing those words from him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what you want to hear from your leaders. You mentioned the running game. I would have liked to see a little bit more from USC on the ground. They still average over 4 yards a carry, which is perfectly fine. But I think against a team like Arizona State that had struggled against the run, you wanted to see a little bit more. And I think from the running backs in particular, Caleb Williams on the ground was great for the Trojans. 8 carries for 44 yards. He really just did exactly what he needed to do on the ground, making plays on third down, getting a few extra yards, getting first downs when the receivers weren't open. But I wanted to see more from Dye, Raleek Brown, Austin Jones, both of those guys. Want to see the running game getting a little bit more involved because you mentioned, and we mentioned this a bunch last week, is when Caleb Williams struggles, and there might be times later in the season when you play a good team like Utah that has a good defense coming up soon. There could be games where Williams doesn't have his best game, and they're going to have to rely on that run game. And I think I would have liked to see a little more against Arizona State, but still, overall, 137 yards on the ground. Not a bad game, just you want to see a little bit more.
And I want to bring up a point that you just made with Caleb Williams, 44 rushing yards. In the first half, on one of the first series of the game for USC, they really couldn't get anything going in the red zone. And then you saw Caleb get that quarterback sneak. I mean, just when he has to do it, he can use his legs. And he's one of the hardest quarterbacks to bring down. I know I said this, but I want to make this a keen point about Caleb. There's so many things with him that you just look at and you go, wow. But, I mean, just the way that he's able, his pocket awareness is some of the best pocket awareness I've seen in college football and even football. I mean, as a big NFL fan, that's unteachable. You see that with guys like Joe Burrow and Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Caleb just has that in him. And I mean, 2024, I think his name's going to be called first when the NFL draft happens.
Yeah, I mean, 2024, we got some time, but certainly with the way he's played this season and the fact that he has a whole nother season at college, it certainly is a possibility. And Caleb Williams, tremendous player. He's been great so far this season and can be even better. And you mentioned that number 1 pick in the 2024 draft is certainly not out of reach.
But all right, let's switch over to defense. We were talking earlier. We had a little bit of a disagreement on some defensive points that we were making. I don't think the defense is good enough to compete against schools like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, etc. But you think it is. I mean, why do you think the defense is good enough to compete against those schools? Because when they're getting the college football playoff, they're not going to be playing schools like Fresno State, Stanford. Those are going to be schools that are scheduled in the first few weeks for schools like Alabama and Georgia and Clemson. So what do you see from the defense that actually makes you believe they're a title contender? Because I'm curious.
I think that, the one thing that's benefiting this defense is that they have a great offense to rely on. And I think that you looked at with those Oklahoma teams under Lincoln Riley. Those defenses weren't that great. They still made the college football playoff. And I'm not saying that you want to be throwing out there, oh, your defense isn't that great. Like, that's not something that you want to boast about. And I'm not saying this defense isn't great. I think this is a very good defense. And one thing that stands out to me, as we've got it written down right here on our sheet, is the Sun Devils, Arizona State, had 8.1 yards per play in the first half on Saturday night. 3.3 yards per play after the break. This defense, they made adjustments. They fixed some mistakes. They only gave up 8 points in the second half, 17 points in the first half. I think that from a coaching standpoint, they did a great job. They made the adjustments they had to make. And like I mentioned earlier, they have a great offense to rely on. This defense doesn't have to be the best unit that USC has. The best unit that they have is their offense, and that's a great thing because their offense might be the best offense in college football. You said it. You think it is. I think if that's the case, the defense doesn't have to be that amazing. I think that the defense has just enough to get it done. They showed you through the first 4 games that they can be great. Their turnover margin is exceptional, one of the best in the country. And I think just give it time. It's early in the season, still 5 games, over half the season to go. I think the second half was promising the other night. No concerns for me from the defense.
I mean, the thing is with the defense, we saw it with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma with teams that featured Hurts and Baker and Kyler. They got to the college football playoff and they would play an SEC or a Big Ten school, and the defense would get shredded apart by guys. Like I remember that game where Joe Burrow went in and just destroyed that Oklahoma team. I just don't feel. I know they.
Joe Burrow destroyed every team that year. There was Joe Burrow.
I'm just giving an example, and I'm saying even like Georgia destroyed Oklahoma that year, where Baker took him to 3 overtimes or whatever that magnificent game was. I just feel that the offense is an elite unit, probably at the top of the class in college football, but the defense isn't going to be good enough to hold up an offense like Georgia that features like Brock Bowers, Stetson Bennett, etc. And then Alabama, they have a great defense and a great offense. USC has a great offense and a mediocre defense. You're talking about the turnover margin, but I think it was a fluke. I mean, you're intercepting a quarterback like Tanner McKee. Tanner McKee gives out the ball like it's candy. Then you're intercepting Rice. You had 3 pick sixes against them. I mean, that's a game where you're probably paying them $1 million to come in and blow them out. And then the turnover margin against Oregon State. You saw this weekend with Oregon State. Chance Nolan threw 2 interceptions. He got the next string. Then the next quarterback comes in. He throws 2 interceptions. So I just feel like when they're getting against better teams, the turnovers aren't going to be there. So they're really, really going to have to rely on the offense to have 50-point outbursts. It's crazy, but that's what they're going to need. And their defense can't be out allowing Arizona State in the first half to get whatever they want. Because if this is the college football playoffs and it's the first half and they're allowing Alabama to get whatever they want, the second half isn't going to go the same way that it did against Arizona State. Because Alabama can score the ball for 4 quarters. Arizona State can't.
And that's why USC is lucky that this is only week 5. And they've only played Arizona State. They haven't played any of these big teams yet. These games happening now are the best thing to happen for USC because there's so much they can learn from them. We saw the second half adjustments the other night. That's what you want to see from your defense. They struggle in the first half. They come out of the second half much better. They don't allow Arizona State to do what they did in the first half. They slow them down, give up just 8 points, limit the damage on offense. And I think that for this game happening in week 5, Utah's coming up in just a few weeks. That's going to be an offense that they have not faced yet this season. Nothing like it. I think this defense, they can only learn from this. They can only get better from this. These games happening early in the season, like with the offense struggling last week, the defense struggled this week in the first half. I think they're going to be just fine. You got to just trust it. And you mentioned the turnover margin. Of course, you play all these bad teams, these non-conference games early on. You mentioned Rice, Fresno State, teams that they do give the ball away, especially when they're playing these really good Power 5 teams like USC. And I think the turnovers, they're not going to have 3 or 4 interceptions every game, 4 turnovers total. They're not going to – there's going to be games where they don't even have any turnovers. But I think these these corners, they get, if they're feeling the ball, they get the interceptions. It's giving them confidence, and that confidence, even when they're not making plays, even when they play a team like Utah that's going to have a much better, that's going to do a much better job securing the football, they're still going to be confident out there, and they're going to be looking for that football. Even if they don't get it every time like they've been getting it recently, it's still it gives them a lot of confidence going forward. So the turnover margin, I don't think it's a fluke. It's just that showing that they're playing to their best abilities. They're taking advantage of these worst teams, and it's going to help them when they play these better teams as far as confidence goes.
When you talk about Utah is definitely going to be the best defense that USC faces all year. But I want to focus on our matchup this weekend against Washington State. I mean, we just had Mike Leach on. You know the history with him, former head coach. Washington State is a good football team. They are 3 points away from being 5-0. They lost that heartbreaker to Oregon a couple of weeks ago, but Cameron Ward has been playing some of the best football in the Pac-12 for a quarterback this year. And I mean, he turns the ball over a lot. He's 7 interceptions on the year, but his quarterback rating is near the top in the entire FBS. This is going to be the biggest test the Trojans have faced on offense. I mean, if Cameron Ward is doing what Emory Jones did in the first half for Arizona State last weekend against USC, USC is going to be in trouble. I hate to tell you, partner, but USC, you know what? I'm not saying USC is going to lose this game, but I think this is a trap game. I mean, call it crazy, but Washington State, I've watched them, and they're a good football team. They have it figured out on offense and defense.
Yeah, I think when you look at Washington State, their offense, they can score the football. 28 points against Cal last week, 41 points against Oregon. Although Oregon's defense hasn't been the strongest this season, still 38 points against Colorado State. Obviously, Colorado State, one of the worst teams in the country. We're not going to do too much with that score. And then aside from the first two games, they scored 24 points in week 1. And then week 2 at Wisconsin, just 17 points. But that Wisconsin, they have a good defense. That's a tough atmosphere. But I think the last 3 weeks, this offense has really shown that they can score the football. And I think if you're USC, this defense cannot afford to get out to a bad start, I apologize, like they did against Arizona State. You mentioned Washington State's defense being good. Coach Leach talked a lot about the defense when we spoke with him early on in the show, saying Washington State's defense really, really, really has stepped it up this season. And I think if you're USC, if that Washington State defense comes to play and they shut down Caleb Williams early and this USC defense has another start like against Arizona State, things can get out of hand and it could be tough for USC to come out of an early hole. So I think you mentioned trap games certainly could happen, but I think it's just going to come down to, can the defense come out and be strong from the get-go? Can they play 4 full quarters? They can't afford to play just the second half this week. They have to play from the first 15 minutes to the last 15 minutes.
And I mean, last week, Washington State played a Cal team that just scored 49 points on Arizona. Washington State held them to 9 points. Jack Plummer is a good quarterback. He's a good quarterback. And I mean, you see Cal's breakout running back, Ott. He rushed for, I don't even know how many yards last week, but it was a ridiculous amount. Washington State's a good defense. And I mean, I'm a little scared for this game. And if they're getting pressure on Caleb and they're getting him to be uncomfortable, which we haven't seen a lot of except for in that Oregon State game, if they find a way to get Addison out of the game, we talked about it earlier. It's good that they have other playmakers outside of Addison. Brandon Rice, Mario Williams, Travis Dye, Austin Jones. I feel like this is going to be a mixture of a running back by committee game, and I'm feeling a Mario Williams game this week. Sorry. I'm making a bold prediction right here. Call me back on it. Mario Williams, 6 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about it. I could be completely off, but I'm feeling good about this prediction.
Yeah, we'll write that down. We'll see if it comes true this week. Washington State Saturday night, but I think this is Mario Williams breakout game. You think it? You say it?
He should have had that touchdown last week. I mean, he got called back. He had a 40-plus yard touchdown. For some reason, there was a ridiculous flag that the ref threw. And I remember at the stadium, the whole crowd was going ballistic. I haven't seen USC that crazy since the Rose Bowl in 2017 against Penn State. Little exaggeration there, but you get the point.
Yeah, for sure. Well, anyways, big game Saturday night. Washington State coming to town to take on the Trojans. Any final notes before we say goodbye?
Oh, no. Thank you so much for joining in to everyone. And subscribe to our YouTube. Check out all the articles on Fan Nation SI about USC. And I'm looking forward to talking next week, hopefully about a Trojan win. But we got a lot in store the rest of the season. So thank you for joining us.
Yep, the Washington State coming to town Saturday night. Go Trojans. We'll see you guys next week.